We're continuing our session with Garry Goodrow. When we left Garry, he had finally made it to the Hollywood, whether he wanted it or not, and he was continuing his career of acting. What year was that, and what happened then?
Well, I went to San Francisco in '63, and we started the committee, and
oh yeah, tell us about that.
That ran for quite a while. It ran for 10 years. I wasn't working there all the time, but it's the kind of thing that spoils you for the real world, because I always had a job if I wanted it, you know. In other words, if I went somewhere else and got broke, I could come back and work at the theater, and that
I
was...
saw some of those shows. They were wonderful.
Well, it's the other way it spoils you for the real world is that we improvised.
It was improvisational theater.
Yeah, and just about every night, I mean, if I was pissed off at something during the day in the news, something like that, I would come that night and do a scene about it. And that kind of spoils you for the real world, because you're doing it for a group of people. And if it turned out to be a good scene, we'd rehearse it and put it in the regular show. And pretty soon you've got, you know, all your things that you want to do and your opinions and so on.
Well,
you can get them out there. Yeah.
I mean, things that everybody
So who were some
comes
of the people
about.
you
Yeah.
worked with on the committee?
In the committee,
How we might know.
well, Howard Hessman, who was Dr. Johnny Fever, Carl Gottlieb, who wrote Jaws. Those two guys were our first two stage managers, and then they became part of the company. Peter Bonners, who's done a lot of television. Larry Hankin, Hamilton Camp, many of you may remember as Bobby Camp. Dick Stahl, Catherine Ish, I'm trying to think of the original company, and a guy named Scott Beach, who was a very big local San Francisco guy, and sometime opera singer with an incredible voice, and a great deal of radio. And a whole bunch, 40 actors went through that company. Peter Boyle was in the company for a while. A lot of people. And so that...
Is there any of that still left?
What do you mean?
Is it still, is there a San Francisco group that can be called descended from that?
Well, yeah, there are a couple of them that are descended from that. One is the Theater of the Deranged.
Well, that's in D.C. now, though, isn't it?
They may have... No, that's the... Yeah.
That's called the government.
That's called the government, right. But the... there was a group called The Wing, and they now have a different name. But they've been there for some time, and there's several improvisational troupes around, you know. We were big local stars, so we got to know, I got to know all of the famous rich people in town, and we'd been invited to parties, and we'd play this and that. So, in the meantime, then, of course, Horrorwood was just down the street there in L.A., and we played like a few weeks there. We took a company down there, and then eventually in late 60s we did 2 years on Sunset Boulevard in a theater called the Tiffany Theater. And
Did you not play San Francisco during that time at all?
no, we had another company in San Francisco. And we had a great show in San Francisco because we had 5 years of work behind us that we could choose from, you know. And while we sat there, while everybody stole our material, the writers, and we come in, actually what two guys came in, and they didn't even write it down themselves. They had a girl sitting between them with a steno pad. Get that, you know, after making a suggestion. And then some of us got a lot of work in television, so I got pretty crazy. I got crazy. I was, well, not to be coy about it, I was a speed freak. And that kind of stopped a lot of things I might have done otherwise. But I did a bunch of movies. Steelyard Blues is the one that everybody remembers with Peter Boyle, Jane Fonda, Donald Sutherland. That's kind of a cult movie that a lot of people like. I like it. And I did small parts in a whole lot of movies. And a whole lot of television sitcoms. And I wound up, I came back to New York, and I did a show in New York called National Lampoon Lemmings with Belushi and Chevy Chase and Chris Guest, and Alice Playton, and others, and that was a big hit. But then I wound up back in San Francisco in the 70s in Story Theater with Paul Sills. And then I lived there and worked in L.A. for several years. And then, for my sins, I lived 7 years in Los Angeles.
Nobody deserves that.
And finally made my way back to New York.
And now you're
Here I am, a New Yorker.
on cable
Now I'm on.
and can do whatever you want.
That's
No,
right.
I mean, that's an advance.
That's an advance. It certainly is. It's an advance.
And you'll be back here, too. They can't stay away. Tell us about you want to talk about your screenwriting?
Well, I've written several screenplays, one of which has been produced. They tried their best to steal it, and then they didn't quite get away with it. I wrote a script with a friend of mine named Peter Elbling, who was part of the Times Square 2, for those of you who may remember, and called Big Baby, about Giant Baby. Disney bought it through a back door and made it into Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
Are you happy with what they did to it?
No.
Okay.
And ours was much more satirical, the script, and it wasn't. Of course, it wasn't about that family. We didn't write it as a sequel to the other movie. We wrote it.
So were you surprised when they picked it up for that?
I was surprised that it hadn't occurred to me to sell it to them. But we wound up getting paid anyway, and getting screen credit because I happened to be a member of a union. The Writers Guild.
Union.
Damn right. If it weren't
So
for
are
the
you still doing screenwriting now?
Yeah, I'm working on this
And you're
and that.
working on your poetry?
And I write poetry. I've always done that. It's one of those afflictions.
And is there a novel somewhere?
Yeah, well, what I'm doing right now is writing a novel which started out as a screenplay, and I just had too much stuff, and I decided I'd write it first as a novel. That'll be finished in a couple of months for those literary agents out there who...
Okay, and we'll have a chapter of that for you in a few months. Now, let's read some more poetry.
All right. Well, we've been talking about L.A. and so on, so I've got a couple of poems about places. One is very brief. It's about San Francisco, and I wrote it one day, years ago, and it sums up San Francisco to me. It's called Romance. I come out of my house built of driftwood on top of Telegraph Hill, and there's these two Chinese seamen manhandling an heiress. I tap dance them into submission, grab the girl, and we go whistling off with the milkman into the fog. That's San Francisco to me. This is a poem that some people were doing a poetry extravaganza reading thing in L.A., and they assigned themes for different nights. And the theme they had for this was Slouching Toward L.A., which of course is a play upon Yeats and so on. So this is the poem I wrote for them. I caught a rattlesnake this morning at the top of Runyon Canyon, and he told me the history of the place. He said it started slowly, just a gully really, way back before the land was real estate. This row of mountains was for almost ever a set of strings played by the rain's fingers, and these canyons are the melodies it played. He rattled on, as rattlesnakes will, about critters, rabbit and deer, fox and hawk, coyote and lizard, and how for a long while Homo sap seemed one of the family, proud to walk naked in the lovely air. But then you others came, he said, with your love of disease. The voluptuous arms of the sandy ridges grope at the flatlands, where old John Muir saw miles and miles of waist-high wildflowers luxuriating seaward. Now it's all gas station. Above us on the hilltop where we were, high-voltage wires hummed sinister, and we looked out together at a hawk hanging below us in the smog, a question mark on the smudged face of Hollywood. "I'm talking to you," said the serpent, "but your minds is posing in a glass-walled office down there where Sid the genius will soon come walking in, looking tan and fit. Sid's the latest of a line of ordinary people who spend all their time pretending to be ordinary people. If you pretend to notice them pretending, and they choose to notice that you're noticing, they may pretend to want to make you rich. They may even make you rich. Sid, you'll say, Sid, you're a genius. The snake was very old and liked to talk. And of course he'd seen them all. Now, old man Wilshire there, a thief with taste and style. At least he only conned the very rich. But Sid, the genius, dirties up the pitch. He hustles the gods themselves for bait and switch. Look at the stories that he buys and sells. Currency molded out of powerful old truths and debased to funny money by a CPA's wisdom. Peace and love and kindness and freedom, all registered trademarks in the salesman's chapel at the Church of the Egregious Assumption. My new friend was on a roll. He even did Sid's everlasting spiel. Sid the genius knows the deal. Nothing not for sale is real. I'll dress your need from hats to shoes in painful comedies, bankers' blues, Muzak symphonies, and fact-free news. Then more confidentially, I'm a genius. Be like me. Make your money with your balls. Your mind will follow eventually. Hey, look, I got it made. I live on factory air. I drive around in my platinum submarine at the bottom of an ocean of meaning, and I never get wet. I reach each day for healthy helpings of contempt and greed, and in the evenings get in touch with my feelings. From the smug sunshine of Bel Air to Burbank's roasted glare, he was getting a little windy there. I asked him to please shut up. I wanted to think for a while, but when I thought, it was about tonight in Los Angeles, when I'll drive and arrive at a place, or maybe just arrive. Big, fat, buttery, baby-faced L.A., pointed fangs bared in baby glee will soon be bearing down on me. And the icky, sticky little hands, thick with syrup of artificially sweetened innocence, gumming up my sleeve. New York's shattered light, Chicago's butchered air, can't match L.A.'s amniotic. No place like it, where all of us, afloat in its belly, wait to be stillborn. You got it, screamed the rattlesnake. Los Angeles is where the future goes to die. Right again, was my reply. And Sid's ain't the only ugly face pretending to ideals and grace that's shitting in the marketplace. The pimp, the yuppie, yay, the square, the shyster, and the quack are everywhere. But there is a conjure we too might do to combat all this ad-man hoodoo. Perhaps, my peripatetic, metaphoric friend, we can work together in the end at soul defense and magical defiance with weapons fashioned by the poet's science. So, I cut off his head, stretched his skin to cure, ate his flesh, hid his rattle inside my guitar.
Is there a New York poem in your bag there?
Yes, there is. First I'm going to do this is called Train from Syracuse, where I've spent a lot of time with my family who live around there. Train from Syracuse, right. The sky is still beautiful, and what's left of the woods where leaves may die without sorrow. There's a sudden, blessed flock of birds, small flock, memento mori of a world gone from us. Few birds anywhere. Dead ponds, dead rivers, lakes glazed with a civilized scum. Mock, unbeautiful life, uncold, unhot, the slime of manufactured reality. I invite you to see the autumn colors as our last trees fight for breath. The sky's still beautiful. I've been told there's something wrong with the sky. And this, New York, although I got a lot of poems about it, this is the one that came up. I don't know. It's called the World Financial Center, which some of you may know. It's a rose night at the tip of the Tulip, Manhattan. Rose light on the water and hanging in the air. The Hudson gray rose striped with rose gray, sweet, deep calm of it. A tugboat nudges two huge barges upstream. A full moon sings in rose mist between the bright glass buildings, sings among the copper rooftops of your great power in New York, while more is broadcast from the 1,000 windows and more flutters on all the flags. Plenty of action in the servants' parking lot and on spectacular glowing plazas. Two plump middle-agers in chemical summer colors like two versions of Petunia Pig. Two wildly obese young Hasidim in black and white gesturing in a dark corner. All of the ship-shaped, neat-eyed crew aboard the power yacht from Cancun. The 30-year-old mad grandmother dressed in garbage bags who has slipped over from the street into all this. All insist they want more. Moon sings proudly over Wall Street about good times to come. Her light is rose. At the tip, the delectable cusp of New York, in tank-top weather and rose-gray glow, great glass copper-crowned towers echoing power over and over. More, the city moans in its ecstasy. I want more.
Speaking of more is less, right? More, was that the name of the cigarette or?
Yeah.
More, right.
And
Hey,
we
Michael
always
Moore
want,
had the TV show that was too good to broadcast, huh?
and there was a journal magazine called one, but we always allow our guests to smoke because it gives us an opportunity to attack them some more.
Right, more.
So, what's a nice, intelligent guy like you?
Tuli, I don't know. I tried quitting many times, right? And then one day in San Francisco, I said, I'm going to stop for a week. And I'm going to walk 10 miles every day or run, and I'm going to stop drinking for a week, right? I was feeling... So I stopped for a week, and it worked. And I just kept stopping. And people would say, you quit. I said, no, I stopped. It was some kind of mental jujitsu, right?
Yeah.
It worked for almost 15 years. And about 4 years ago, I was in New York. I was broke. I didn't have a place to live. I was partially crippled by an accident. It turned out at the time I had pneumonia. I got a room in the Jane Street Hotel, one of the more depressing spots in the face of the earth, and I was sitting there and I had just bought a pack of cigarettes. I had stopped and had 3 quick cheap wines at a rum-dum bar, and I was sitting there, and the only thing, I think it was the beginning of getting out of the depression, because I suddenly saw myself sitting there coughing, smoking, bald, in this freezing room, and I saw myself as a panel in Misery comics. You know, the picture was just so good that it kind of cheered me up. But I've been unable to stop since then, and I'm smoking more than I ever smoked before. I plan to stop for the month of November and see what happens.
Well, for whatever it's worth, I know every case is different. I smoked for over 15 years, but I stopped by going down 1 cigarette a day.
I tried everything like that, Tuli. It never worked for me.
Well, it's hard for me.
Well, the only thing that works is wanting to quit. I mean, you can use every technique in the world,
Yeah.
but
Well, I mean-
in the end, it's a resolve that has to...
Yeah, it's, you know...
You got to be ready to quit.
Well, I guess you got to be ready. It's like when I did it. I didn't say I quit, because every time... Listen, I once quit in New York. I quit. I was in New York, and I would say, oh, let me have a drag on that, or I would bum cigarettes from people. But I had quit, and I was having withdrawal symptoms. But like I said, I would wake up in cold sweat, and she said I was moaning and crying and yelling in my sleep. And so I got a movie, and I was on location in Northern California, and according to my act, I had quit smoking. But I was sneaking down and buying not even my brand, you know, because of what they had in the machine, and sneaking cigarettes until one day I was there with a cigarette, and who precisely are you kidding? You know what I mean? And so I went back to smoking. And so I tried all those various things. But then the day I said I'm going to stop for a week, no, I haven't quit. I'm going to stop for a week. For some reason, that worked for almost 15 years. I mean, after a while, I used to have dreams where I was, in the dream, I'd be performing somewhere where I had to smoke. And I'd be thinking in the dream, this is me on hook again. But there's a scene that I used to do, that I often do in benefits, because it's easy to teach to the other person. And it's a man and a woman, there's no words, and the guy just does all these stupid, cigarette tricks, throwing it into his mouth and all this stuff, and burns her hair and blah, 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 Does all, it's just a sort of a slapstick scene. So I did it. Hadn't smoked in a couple of years, and didn't make any difference. I was able to do it, and then I did it 2 or 3 times. It never had a problem. It wasn't until the lowest point of my life, that was, a few years ago, when I was just depressed and whipped and, dragging my ass around the street, that suddenly there was a cigarette in my hand. And I was a heavy smoker, man. For years, I would be at a party like this, with a drink in one hand and my fingers like this. My fingers like this without a cigarette. After I stopped, I mean, it was so much a habit that
I don't claim to be, I'm interrupting you, but
Then go on, please.
Before they disappear from my head. I don't claim to be any kind of expert on withdrawing, but is it wise to try to stop drinking and smoking at the same time? That's
I have no idea. We'll find that out.
The other thing is, somewhere there's a case to be made for, a legal case, to be made for the harm from cigarette smoking just as an addiction.
Yeah.
And I advise, and you seem like an ideal candidate to start that case, and you could devote half of your winnings to an anti-smoking foundation.
I'll tell you something.
If you can think about a lawyer who might be willing to do that, I don't know. It would take
I used to
a lot of
smoke.
time and energy.
I used to smoke Shermans,
Yeah.
cigarettes, and they are only tobacco. Well, I'm now hooked on Marlboros, and when I buy a pack of Shermans, they don't satisfy me. I think that there are chemicals aside from the bleaches and saltpeter and all that stuff. I think they actually have little amounts of other chemicals that are even more addictive than saltpeter. And I think they probably add other stuff that is even more addictive than nicotine. Because I'm hooked on these things. I'm not hooked on tobacco, because when I smoke plain tobacco, it doesn't get it. So these schmucks have been deliberately poisoning the populace for many years, and they're trying to make it more poisonous with every step. And of course, they're doomed. They know that. Eventually, some people come to their senses, but I mean, you're much better off with a heroin habit than you are with this, except for the law. Except for the law, but your life heroin is much safer than tobacco.
2 things. I was in Christiania in Copenhagen, the hippie community, a couple of weeks ago, and inside that little community within Copenhagen, hash is legal, and people were selling it on the street there. And then I passed a guy, and he's selling Marlboro. But it wasn't Marlboro. It was something called Prince with the exact same color.
Right.
And this poor schmuck has about 40 packages of cigarettes, imitation Marlboro, exactly the same colors, almost the same design. And he was the most pitiful of all, That was the most pitiful scene of all. The other is Mr. Tisch, who's the head of one of the, is it R.J. Reynolds? He's head of one of the 3 largest tobacco companies in America, chairman of the board, and he's also on the board of the Memorial Cancer Hospital.
Right.
So he's got it both ways.
Yeah.
He's got it all ways. So,
the one-stop death shop.
And I can't help giving some kudos, and what's kudos in reverse? Sudoc. To the Academy of Music in Brooklyn, who in the city hearings against smoking in restaurants and public places just recently held at City Council of Manhattan, in New York City. They and other groups, they called specifically to be against that ban because they get a lot of their funding from Philip Morris. Well, they can take that funding for the arts and shove it up their lungs, shove it up their ass, you know.
And now they're threatening to leave town. That's their thing. And 2,000 jobs.
And Bologna, who was sort of a horror in many other cases, he quit smoking some years ago, and he said, "Hey, you know, regardless of this legislation, how it goes, that's a good idea. Why the hell don't they get out of it?" So now let's wind up or finish with something more pleasant than smoking.
Okay, I'll do a brief poem. This is about New York, and it's about, well, I may have time for two, but this is a couple of years ago during that depression, right? Who is she? Come with her large balloons to parade my own band past me, and I have to watch it like a crippled dictator on a reviewing stand. Hard enough just to be one of the crowd these days, ready with banners and cheers for the next extravagant daredevil ball of fire act to pass by, but she makes me a player again. She's caught me by my secret, athletic soul. Perfect ranks of Technicolor Marines march expertly out of her eyes, carrying the day to glory. I show nothing. I nod from behind my aviator shades. Why does her mouth seem to feel such pride of place? Who gave her my arrangements? Now she's gone, and the music with her. El Jefe, stone-faced, awaits the revolution. Okay, one more quick one. This is again from that same period. Imagine a TV in a store window, and me standing in the rain, watching video kisses, where over and over, through a blue filter, the faces move together and move apart. Then, on another sidewalk, in the same rain, I imagine kissing the girl behind me in line, and over, our faces move together and move apart. Inside the theater, out of the rain, huge screen faces move together, move apart, kisses artfully keyed to my imagining. And later on 6th Avenue, walking along in the rain, I glimpse a young couple in a doorway. She's one step up, and it's an actual kiss. A glance is to know all, as their faces move together and remain together permanently, or so I imagine.
Want to say something to our
something to the vast audience?